What happens when we ask young people what they think their education should be and the kinds of changes they want to make? We get truly paradigm breaking conversations, ideas, and discoveries. And that's exactly what happened at the Student Power Summit. And I'm excited to share this brief snapshot of that conference with you today. Hello and welcome to Breaking the Paradigm. I'm your host, Andrew Falstich. The mission of this podcast is to have conversations that break the traditional paradigm of education, whether that's at the classroom level, at the global level, or anywhere in between. We are not interested in rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Rather, we are interested in true transformational change. This is a really unique episode for me. I was honored to be a part of the Student Power Summit, which this year took place in Los Angeles, California, earlier this week. As part of that work, not only did I facilitate a workshop, but I also had the opportunity to take various podcast clips to do a podcast episode at the event and also to record some of the key insights that happened in the different breakouts. So I'm really excited to share some of that with you today. What you'll start with hearing is actually my pre-conference reflection the day before the event based on work that I'm reading, this excellent book, Lost Connections by Johann. Then the second thing you'll hear or see, depending on if you're watching or listening or both, is a conversation after the first day of the summit with Jason Blair and Jennifer Goen about what they're taking away from the summit and the impact that Homeboy Industries, which was the partner of the conference, had on their learning and thinking. And then the third part is where you'll hear directly from the students themselves. They had not only the opportunity to be in breakouts with the adults, but also to have their own breakouts where they came together to really look at what are the things that they want educators and leaders to know about how they want their education to be. And I'll just say that this is the first conference I've ever been to that truly centered and uplifted and empowered student voice. The energy was incredible. The conversations were transformational. The students weren't just observers, but they were there really to push back, to question, to say what they had to say. And that forum was very carefully designed by Mike Nicholson, who organized the event, who's brought really incredible people together. So I want to give him a big shout out and thank you. So I hope you all enjoy. There will hopefully be some more footage that I'm able to release. I have a lot more that I recorded, but I wanted to get this out as a bit of a capturing of the insights, the ideas, the conversations that were happening at this event. It was great to meet so many folks across the education world, both in the US and internationally, and I hope that you will enjoy. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Breaking the Paradigm. I am here on a Sunday, the day before the Student Power Summit, here in Los Angeles. Right now, I'm in beautiful Santa Monica. You can't quite see. There's the ocean behind me. Perhaps you can see a little bit. I've been taking today to walk around and explore and check out the sights. But I wanted to take a moment to share just some insights that I've been gaining from this book that I've been reading, and I have it right here. Perhaps I should have pulled it out in advance. It's called Lost Connections, Why You're Depressed and How to Find Hope. And you might be wondering, Andrew, what does that have to do with education? Well, it continues to be the most popular piece on Breaking the Paradigm is my piece on the adolescent mental health crisis and how it's really easy for us to blame a boogeyman like phones or technology or kids these days for the problems that they face. And there are people who are profiteering off of precisely that idea that it is merely the fault of these kids and they just need to suck it up and stop being so addicted to their tech and just go outside and touch grass. But the reality is that is not the cause of our mental health crisis. And what I talked about in the piece is how the institution of schooling, that environment, is itself a major part of the problem. if not the most major part of the problem. And so this book, Lost Connections, was recommended to me at the Montessori Experience Conference hosted by AMI this past year in San Diego by Laura Ewart-Crocker in the adolescent session. And there's just a few pieces that I wanted to share with you all that I'll be talking about tomorrow at the Student Power Summit, but I felt were that continue to really puzzle me and make me think. And make me think about the importance of not tinkering at the edges of a broken system, but really digging into how we might fundamentally transform it for the better. And so, there's this idea here in the book that culturally we have been pushed to believe that depression and anxiety, or maybe we could extend that to even poor mental health in general, is a result of a chemical imbalance in the brain. And because there's a chemical imbalance in the brain, we need to take antidepressants or anti-anxiety medication to fix that chemical imbalance. And that clinical depression is merely just an issue of brain chemistry being off. But such an idea is just totally untrue. And I've not yet finished the book, but essentially, what the author does here, which I think he does really well, is give clear decades worth of research that actually demonstrates that clinical depression is a result of our environments, and research that shows that it is a response to adversity, and that it wasn't just a factor of something that, one of the things they looked at, for example, was people in poverty. But poverty wasn't actually the thing that caused depression. What poverty often meant for folks who were in poverty was that they were subjected to severe stress and horrible events happening that were sustained over a long period of time. But that is something that can happen to anyone. They later go on to say, this one researcher says, no organism exists without the environment. So it can't just be that depression happens without any type of issue of the environment. And so, when we think about Montessori education, when we think about progressive education, when we think about education more broadly, we're talking about preparing an environment for young people. And what we are seeing is that the prepared environments of traditional school that make children and adolescents subjected to long, sustained periods of stress via grades, via standardized exams, via having to sit and listen and take notes and be accountable for the amassing of information. That long-term, environmentally driven stress is leading to that is what is causing depression and anxiety among our adolescents. We are seeing, and not just in our young people, of course it's significant in our young people, but we're seeing it across the adult population too. We are seeing that there are increasing rates of depression and anxiety. It is not because something is just wrong with these people's brains. It is because the environments that we are putting people in are fundamentally creating the conditions of sustained stress over time, which leads to this outcome. We are creating environments where poor mental health is the result of young people existing in these environments. And one of the things that Johann, the author, does is he gives the environmental reasons. What are the things that cause, in addition, of course, to this broader idea of sustained stress over time, that cause depression and anxiety? These are, among others, disconnection from meaningful work is the first one. Think about the work that most children and adolescents are asked to do in schools. Most of it is not meaningful work. Most of it is work that is meant to determine compliance. Do this work so that you can prove to me that you can do this work when I tell you to do this work. And when we have that sustained year over year for 18, 24 years of a young person's life, what do we find? Disconnection from meaningful work. Disconnection from other people. Think about the ways that traditional schooling is set up. Desks in rows. Working with other people is cheating. My gain is someone else's loss. We are socializing solidarity and connection from others out of our young people in our schools. Cause 3 is disconnection from meaningful values. In some schools, the only values are look out for yourself and rat out on other people, because that is what is incentivized in some of these institutions. We also have disconnection from the natural world. That's a major, major issue for our young people today, because we're not giving them opportunities to be out in the natural world the way we used to. And finally, we also have disconnection from a hopeful or secure future. Our young people know viscerally, now more than ever, and I talked about this in my conversation with Raj Chawla and Andrew Cutt, that the future is uncertain, that we are careening toward a future that may not be hopeful, that we are the only species on the planet, to quote Will Richardson, that is actively causing our own destruction. And in the name of profit and shareholder value, we are continuing these systems which are leading us toward global collapse. And so my provocation is this. My provocation on a Sunday is this. For you all, I'd love to hear from folks. How can we, what would it take, what kinds of courage would be required so that we can create an environment where all those things that are typically disconnected from our young people in these educational environments, from meaningful work, from others, from values, from the natural world, from a secure and hopeful future, what would have to change? What would we have to get rid of? What would we have to lose to create an environment where those are possible? To create an environment where the outcome of being in that environment is not depression and anxiety and poor mental health, but in fact, not just a positive outlook, but a totally new way of engaging with society and with self and others. So I'll be sharing more from the Student Power Summit. That will come later, perhaps even in this episode, depending on how I stitch it together. But thanks for watching and listening, and I look forward to seeing you next time on Breaking the Paradigm. Hello and welcome to Breaking the Paradigm. I'm your host, Andrew Falstich. The mission of this podcast is to have conversations that break the traditional paradigm of education, whether at the classroom level, the global level, or anywhere in between. We are not interested in rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Rather, we are interested in true transformational change. And this is a super special episode. We are at the Student Power Summit here in beautiful Los Angeles, and I am joined by two excellent guests and presenters today, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hello, my name is Jason Blair. I'm an elementary art teacher from Columbus, Ohio. This is my 24th year, and I had a presentation earlier today at the Student Power Summit.
My name is Jennifer Cohen. I'm in my 21st year teaching. I'm primarily a high school English teacher, but I also teach sixth graders now at HB Woodlawn Secondary Program in Arlington, Virginia, where I'm the instructional lead teacher. I coach teachers on self-directed learning, and we are a democratic school, and so we are navigating what it means to give students a voice in the school structure and in their pedagogy and their learning.
So I wanted to take this time with Jennifer and Jason to sort of dig into some of your key takeaways of what are you walking away from, or what are you walking away with after today's session? What's sitting with you? What's resonating with you? What are you looking forward to carrying forward to tomorrow and beyond?
I think for me, the heart-centered nature of this work is just really shining through. Like, we know that the heart is at the center of teaching, but I can really feel it here today in a big way. It's kind of the spirit. Actually, I talked to a Montessori educator from South Africa last month, and I'm the instructional lead teacher and I coach teachers, and she said, "What is the spiritual practice that you introduce?" And it took me a minute. It was like, oh, yeah, you're right. It is spiritual work. And so it has felt that way today in the sessions. Like, what is the human spiritual element of teaching?
I think for me, a couple takeaways. One is with partnering up with Homeboy Industries here in LA, who is a rehabilitation program with an amazing track record. And one of the things that struck me was even their intake, when they have students or people coming in to their program, they start off with what their strengths are, and they start off asking what they're interested in, and they give them surveys, and they, what classes do we need, and they make adjustments to it. And what struck me about that was when students come to us in traditional schooling, we focus right away on their deficiencies. Right away, we start from a deficit model instead of a strength, and it kind of was reiterated to me when I heard that, because for me, as an art teacher, I'm a firm believer that every single person in this world is an artist. It's just for some of them, we've blossomed, and others it's atrophied a bit. But it's like, that's what school is. When a child is born until they're like 5 or 6 years old, they live the world like an artist. They're curious, they make, they create. And then when they hit school, we have a choice. We can either say, let's double down on that strength that you have and let's build from that, or let's say that whole mindset is now worthless and let's focus on what your deficiencies are. And so when I heard Homeboy today talk about the fact they start off with their strengths, it's such a beautiful thing that creates that sense of value. Right away, you're telling that child or that student or that person that they matter, because you're asking them, you're telling them, actually, I value, and I'm also letting you have opportunity to show value for others. And that was a really big, powerful takeaway for me so far.
Well, I mean, both of what you just said, I think, really resonates with my takeaway. And for those who don't know, Homeboy Industries supports folks who are former gang members and supports them in rehabilitating them into society. But what I heard today and what I heard last night at the leadership dinner is that it's really about transformation. And through this deeply spiritual practice, whether or not you're a religious person, they just said this in the closing, whether or not you're a religious person, there's a spiritual aspect to this radical and unconditional belonging and love and support and building on the strengths of each person. And because that's the environment that they create, the outcomes that they get are folks who are able to fundamentally transform their lives. We look at the environments that we give most of our young people, and we look at the outcomes. We see an adolescent mental health crisis. We see folks who don't know what their passion is, don't know what their purpose is, or who see themselves merely as cogs in the machine. I have a lot of friends who are very, very intelligent, went through traditional schooling, and are doing things like building parts of bombers for weapons manufacturers. And they don't see the impact of the work that they're doing. They don't think about it in terms of this larger social transformation because, well, I did my thing, I became an engineer, I followed the directions, I got the good job, and yada yada. So I think that there's the environments that we create give us the outcomes that we have today. And I've been really struck by how, if we want to see a different type of world, if we want to see a world where our young people aren't struggling, if we want to see a world that's based in interdependence and not extraction and hierarchy, then we have to do exactly what you both said. We have to build on the strengths of each individual. We have to create democratic structures where students learn how to live together in real ways with real consequences. Jennifer told a great story at her session where she's been trying to change the schedule at her school for years, but that has to go through the school town meeting, and students have not voted that through. And while on the one hand that may sound frustrating for an adult, what an incredible experience of learning to live together in a democratic fashion, and what inner spiritual work is required to, as the adult, be okay with that. I mean, I think it's just incredible.
Yeah, and I think to that point too, with the democratic model is, I think the other thing I'm seeing glimmers of too is this shift away from an individual focus on education, and education being an individual pursuit when it's really a collective one, right? These problems and issues that we're facing as a society cannot be solved by any one person. And so I love this idea of having a collective approach and the democratic process, and realizing that that we're all in this together. It's empowering students to understand the smartest person in the room is the room. And I think there's a lot to be said at this. What I've been blown away by this is just the student voice, yes, but also the collective voice, the voice of all of us together is how we're going to create change. And I think that's been really powerful. And I love how you're doing that at your school as well.
Yeah, it reminds me of a quote I shared today in my presentation, that education for human freedom is education for human community. And so kind of balancing, we balance at my school self-directed learning, self-governance, but the other side of that is caring community, equity, that I'm not self-directed for the purpose of pleasing myself and, just following my own passion wherever it takes me. I can follow my inner voice, and it's going to lead me to community, and my inner voice is contextualized in a context. It's going to weigh your inner voice, it's going to create a collective discernment, and so I appreciate the balance and the call for community, along with agency.
And what a radical idea that you both just shared, because it's so countercultural to the kinds of ideas that we're pushing our young people in traditional schooling, that everything's done by the individual, that working with somebody else is cheating, that we're individual nodes competing, and that my gain is somebody else's loss. When in fact, the opposite is true, yet we socialize our young people to have that belief. There was in, Jane, you'll have to tell me how I pronounce Tyler's last name. Is it that's what I thought, but I didn't want to say it wrong. In Tyler Thigpen's session, you did this great thing where he said, if we were to create a school with the most dependent learners, make them as dependent as possible, what would we do? Strict bell schedule, police the minutia, only knowledge comes from the font at the top. We're all lecture-based, standardize everything. And what we described was what most schooling is for most kids. And then, of course, he flipped the question. What would it look like to create an independent learner? And it was all the things that we don't do that are actually part of our nature, that we know from self-determination theory, that when we are given autonomy, we are pro-social, that we seek to be in community with others. And when we are controlled, we become antisocial. We seek to harm other people. And yet we just don't do that at mass scale.
That reminds me of, that the book Jalmay Tensarafine wrote years ago about In Search of Deeper Learning, and they searched 1,500 schools for that, and where they found it was on the periphery. And on the periphery, meaning the arts courses, drama, band, all of those things. I think it's because of those that it's a collective pursuit, right? And there's intrinsic motivation, and there's choice, and there's agency embedded in there. And the irony in all that is we still marginalize those same subjects. We still don't understand the power of what they do. And it goes back to that original point of every single person is born an artist. For some of us, it's atrophied, and we need to find that again. But the reality is, the world we live in today would be a much better place if we had more people that had an artist mindset in positions of power. Doesn't mean you have to be a fine artist. What it means is you're able to slow down and notice connections. You have an empathetic soul. You're able to collaborate. Like, all the things that are inherent in the arts are what our world needs. And I think that's one of the things that I saw again in Homeboy Industries, was that art was central to what they do. And that's by no mistake. I mean, they understand what it does, and they use it as a therapeutic approach. And if we have a school system that is not only, we're talking about the trauma that happens, that kids are dealing with today in schools, and yet we're ignoring the fact that schools are traumatizing kids. And I think that's another an element of where the arts can come in, and I think that's something that I know is prevalent in most progressive and democratic schools as well. So
that idea that, maybe it was a conversation we were having last night, was about, someone said it at dinner, I think, well, there's just not ever going to be enough therapists. We have this mental health crisis, there's never going to be enough therapists. That's not the solution, right? The therapists might help these young people that already face depression, anxiety, other mental health challenges, but they're not the solution. The solution is changing the system. I don't know if I've ever said it live on the podcast, but I've said it more recently in a few circles. If you'd asked me 3-4 years ago, Andrew, do you think it would be more or less harmful to completely shut down most systems of education for a year or 2 years and then reformulate what comes next? I would have said, yeah, that'd be more harmful than not, and we shouldn't do that. And I've actually come to a place, because of the research I've done, because of the schools that I've seen, that actually I think it would be less harmful to shut down most schools for a year or two while we figure out what a more humane version would be, because of the harm that I've seen done to young people. And in fact, there's much less harm. Now, putting aside the social services aspects, right, the folks who are on free and reduced lunches, those kinds of things, like assuming we can meet those other basic needs, a lot of the harm, I think, is so much worse than if young people are just left to their own devices for some time, because then they're actually going to have the ability to do the things they want to do, to focus on what's interesting to them, and then they can come back into this work in a system that's designed based on their needs, that's designed for that, for that belonging, that autonomy, that competence. I don't know. I don't know what you all think about that, but that's where I've sort of come to.
So someone asked me recently, like, how I got into this, besides the fact that I've been in a democratic school for 20 years, but like, what drew me there? What's internally? And I was realizing, I think it goes back to 7th grade when my mom pulled me out of school. She needed help watching my baby brother and baby sister, and she was dealing with her own mental health stuff. And she pulled me out of school to help watch the kids. And I did. And she homeschooled me for the year, but I really unschooled, and I rode my bike to the library and I read whatever books I wanted to read, and I started a babysitting company or business for myself, and I made all kinds of money, and I managed my budget, and I learned whatever I wanted to learn. And I had been not doing great in 6th grade. Like, it was a pretty oppressive place, and my grades were low, and I hated school, and I just had a year off. And I came back in 8th grade, and not only socially was I totally fine and maybe better, but my academics, like my scores when I tested in 8th grade, were just so far beyond where I'd been in 6th grade. And so I joke sometimes, like, you just don't need 7th grade. But I keep asking, like, what other grades do we not need? Where else could we pull? And if we just kind of let kids follow their curiosities, what would happen? It was life-changing for me.
And I think that parallels perfectly this idea of play. Right? I think a lot of times that's absent, and that's where we're seeing, that's like, a lot of times you think of social media as being the one that's doing it all, and really all the research kind of bears out is that actually it's a lack of play. And with that play, you have independence, and you have the idea to navigate, and you don't have parents around to do those things. And that's something that's needed. I mean, the quote is, play is a child's work. That's needed at every level, even in high school, and it looks differently. But what it means is essentially it's risk-free, it's experimentation, it's what we need to have happening in classrooms. And if it's hyper-focused on the product at the end and the scarcity model, then play naturally is not going to be a part of it. You've already taken that out of it. And I think the more we can embed playfulness into the classroom space, it invites this sort of communal aspect of invention and risk-taking and curiosity and things that aren't in school right now. And there's, like, in our district, we have kindergartner now, which we didn't have before. There wasn't all-day kindergarten, and they've called it purposeful play. And what I love that they have play in there, but it also, for me, is a little bit of, they put purposeful in front of it for a reason, and that's to sell it to people, to make sure you don't think it's, when that's kind of going against the nature of what it is. Play has a purpose. But that does remind me of the independence and the level of playfulness that we need to bring back to our schools, because what it is it's sort of, it unfolds then. The day unfolds. It breaks the monotony and the routine that kids are sort of tired of, because playfulness means I don't know what's going to happen next, but let's try it and see what happens. And that, I think there's power in that sort of learning experience.
And to make that possible, a student in Tyler's session today raised her hand and made a great point. She said, we need to stop trying to measure everything. Because the question was, well, how do we measure student self-directed learning and this and that? She's like, why don't we just stop trying to measure it? And in order to make this idea of play and the natural unfolding possible, we have to create an environment where every single thing the student does is not assessed and evaluated. And yeah, there's feedback given, and there's sort of natural feedback and when certain things happen, but we need to stop making it seem like the child is on stage with the spotlight on them every moment of every day. I think we get caught in that, like, oh, well, we're doing self-directed learning, and so we have to, like, prove everything they're doing is valuable, and then we get caught in that same assessment trap. And I've seen that happen. We're like, but I just have to continue to prove that this is worth doing. And we have to remove ourselves from that cultural idea that we have to measure every single thing, that we have to make everything be efficient. And I was talking with a student out here instead of going to the last session, and he was saying, he was talking about how efficiency has really sort of taken over his high school experience, and how terrible is that? Because then there isn't the room to experiment, to play, to try something on without it having to be performative and on all the time.
The thing I'll say about efficiency, because it does drive me crazy, is that education somehow got lumped in this short-term game of assessment. And education is a long-term game. You don't see the fruits of that until much later in life. And I think that's one of the things that sort of is holding us back, is because there's a need to find out what the assessment is at the end of the year to move on. And I think that that's missing the point of what education is. It's about this growth. And I also think it's the antithesis of creativity. If we have to, because when you have efficiency in schools, what it does is it forces teachers to choose between relation and transaction. And so when you have a school that's set up on transaction based, you're not going to get the type of learning you could if it was relational based. And relations take time, and we have to make sure we push back on the efficiency of it. Not everything has to be about efficiency. Some of it is about like letting some things marinate, letting a child walk away from a question and come back to it the next day or a week later, and not saying, well, we've moved on for that, we don't have time for that. Or even if it's something, a child playing with something in second grade and they want to play with it right then, and you say, no, you have to do that at recess. They've lost sight of that. When they want to play with it at recess, here's what it is. It's getting a test audience, it's getting a focus group, it's iterating, it's doing all these powerful learning experiences that we're not letting happen in the name of efficiency. And I think that's a point we need to change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think that's a great place for us to pause. I will say my session tomorrow is talking about this idea of relationships. So if y'all are interested, maybe stop by. Thank you for those who are listening. If you have not heard about the Student Power Summit, check it out. Come join us next year. And thanks everybody, and we'll see you next time on Breaking the Paradigm.
Yeah.
We just finished.
Outside,
Southern Oregon
we
University
have a group of students who are going to be
holistic
presenting their
education
findings
program.
from yesterday's World Cafe.
That's really cool. Is it
We don't have 2 minutes.
in person?
In person.
So, they're going to come on up and tell you a little bit about their conversation they had yesterday. These students come from Central Ohio from 3 different districts. If you guys didn't know, Central Ohio is the second most economically segregated metro area in the entire country. And these guys came from Columbus City Schools, ONTNG local schools, and Westerville City Schools. I have a connection to all 3 of them because I graduated from Westerville. My son goes to Columbus, and I teach at ONTNG. You guys can come on up. Go ahead and tell a story.
Hey, hi everyone. My name is Jasmine. I'm a junior in high school in Central Ohio. I go to ONTNG Orange, and I'm the president and the founder of Stream. And so for our World Cafe, we like the group Stream. Stream stands for Striving for Transformation, Respect, Empowerment, Education, and Mobilization. And it's an advocacy coalition that I created because I think that there's a lot of issues, obviously, that we see in the world around us, and I think a lot of kids don't believe that they have the tools or the means or the knowledge or just the ability to help solve any of them. And so the goal was to get a group of kids who were passionate about solving current events issues, reforming education, and bring them together and try to create change. And a big way that we've done that so far is through discussion. So for the World Cafe, the main focus is, educators. We have problems, here's some solutions. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to talk about issues that kids face, addressable issues that they see in their communities, and then talk about solutions, and that's what we did. And now I'm gonna leave the floor to my other student leaders who are gonna introduce themselves and say a little bit about what advocacy means to them.
Hi everyone, my name is Anika Shripulakirti, and I'm a junior from ONTNG Berlin High School in Central Ohio. Being here means a lot to me because it's an opportunity to learn from people who care about making a difference and to be part of conversations that actually matter. I chose advocacy because I believe change only happens when people are willing to speak up, share their perspectives, and stand up for others. I'm really excited to learn from all of you and grow together through this experience.
Hi, I'm Michelle Autry, and I go to ONTNG Berlin High School in Ohio. And I just feel this conference means a lot to me because I really value education along with my peers here and want the best possible learning experience for students. And I'm looking forward to hearing everybody's diverse perspectives on learning and how we can improve on it. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Candace Bowe. I'm from Westerville Central. I chose advocacy and Stream because it gives young people the opportunity to speak up about issues that matter to us and work together to make a real impact.
Hello everyone, my name is Sophia Williams. I'm from Central Ohio, Fort Hays.
I chose advocacy because I wanted to help inform and educate people about issues and topics that people don't usually talk about.
Hi everybody, I'm Abinaya Johann. I'm from Berlin, and I chose STREAM because I was done waiting for somebody else to do the change. I wanted to be the next change.
Hello guys, my name is Sophia. I'm a junior at Owen State High School, and advocacy means a lot to me because I specifically work with civic engagement. And I feel like if everyone brings their voices together, we can all create some change. But one big thing that we need out of engagement is energy, guys. We're in LA.
Hi, my name is Veronica Tierney. I go to Westfield South High School in Central Ohio. And to me, advocacy means using your voice to speak up for those who can't. And I don't think there's anything more powerful than coming together to use your voice.
Hi, my name is Kristen Autry. I'm a senior at authentically Berlin High School. And advocacy to me is giving people the agency and the power to make change and not feel helpless about the things they see going on in current events.
Okay, so for our World Cafe, basically a summary of what we did was we gathered all of the students here at the conference and we kind of split up into small groups and sections. And what we did was we thought of issues in our communities, schools, and basically for our solutions, we kind of discussed what teachers can do about it and what us as students can bring forward.
And here's a quick group picture of all of us.
All right, and so for what we asked, so at all the tables and all the stations, we had a big sheet of paper where all the students could write down answers to these questions. So some of the questions we asked were, how might a community shift if youth perspectives guided decision making? Another question was, what does advocacy look like to you? Or if you could say one thing to an educator, what would you say? There were a lot of intellectually stimulating conversations and really awesome responses that some of us will share later.
So after conducting our World Cafe, we gathered all of the responses that we saw from the students. Here are the answers that some of the students brought forth at this cafe. So what does advocacy look like to you in direct relation to the current state of the world? So here are some ideas that we saw: change, mindset, freedom, equality, respect, perspectives, opinions, and listening. So these are some of the biggest ideas that we saw from our students. Another question that we presented and gathered our responses from was, what do you feel the biggest addressable issues facing your community's citizens are? So we saw financial literacy, drug issues from peer pressure, FOMO, dependency on AI, social desirability, and being underestimated by the older population, performative advocacy, lack of community service, and discrimination against kids with learning disabilities.
And just to add one thing on to what advocacy looks like to us in direct relation to the current state of the world, obviously you see the word cloud here, which has a lot of the words that were commonly represented in student responses, but the general idea is that a lot of students felt like advocacy to them meant the ability to bridge perspectives to speak out about what they see around them. So whether that's walkouts, that was something that we talked about a lot. A lot of kids felt like walkouts is something that, walkouts and forms of protest are a way for them to, a way for them to exercise advocacy. A lot of people talked about how advocacy to them looks like being able to speak to someone in power, whether that's an adult or a teacher, about their issues and have their perspectives be heard. So basically a lot of the responses that we got where students felt like using their voice was a key component in advocacy.
And now we're going to transition to some of the student voices from the circle. Here are just some great takeaways that we had, and we'd like to share it with you guys.
basically, we all got in a circle and we asked all the students if there was one thing we could tell educators based on what we talked about and what would it be. Some of what everybody said was tragedy is closer than you think. Just because you're different doesn't mean you matter less. If we don't feel comfortable to ask a question, are they really doing their jobs?
Others said, if I'm not the best, I'm worthless. It's everyone's first time living. Don't teach out of a textbook, use context for more valuable learning. And there's always something bigger going on outside the classroom.
Toxic competition between students stem from Western culture. There's always something bigger going on outside the classroom.
Before we go into solutions, a lot of the quotes from students were centered around key ideas. A lot of what we talked about in the discussion and the circle that we had was that competition that we talked about before. There's a lot of toxic competition that's inhibiting people's mental health, that's impeding their access to an education that's not just educational, but something that's engaging, something that makes them feel connected to their learning. When you're focused on competing with other students, you're not as focused on really engaging with the learning, engaging with the material. And a lot of what we talked about are how educators need to understand that their class is not everything that the kids have going on in their lives. A lot of times, when you're in a class, and whether that's the way that they assign work, the way that they relate with students, there's not a lot of allowance or empathy is what students were talking about. And there's always something bigger going on outside the classroom represents the idea that there's always something else going on in the students' lives. We don't only have school. We have extracurriculars, there's home issues, there's personal issues. And so something that we really wanted to drive home is the importance of educators understanding that their material is not the center of the students' lives. And by prioritizing empathy, we feel that students would learn more and feel more free in the classroom.
So before I start, I just want to thank everyone who's at the World Cafe because I know you guys shut down on time, and so just really pat yourselves on the back. I know you guys I know we made you guys eat really quickly, but thank you. Alright, so the three categories of solutions that we came up with is that in classrooms we need to increase our engagement, leave room for errors, and less erase the stigma that we have about competition that really cultivates in the Western culture like we mentioned about earlier. Thank you.
And so our solutions, we center them around three key insights. These are the main things that we wanted to communicate, all the ideas grouped into three key points about styles of learning and aspects of learning that are important to foster positive outcomes for kids.
So, as we know, human civilization, we're all social creatures. So if we're able to foster these really, really nourishing relationships with our educators, I feel like that could really, really increase our learning and also regain a skill that we lost in critical thinking, where we just don't take information at face value. And I feel like what students could do is that there's a lot of teachers, I know probably most of you guys here, you guys are really open to become friends with your students. So I feel like us students, we should be able to understand that. But for teachers, there are a lot more teachers who are stuck at the traditional route of just teaching through the curriculum and not becoming friends. So I feel like if teachers would do better at that, then that would help us too.
And adding on to that, teachers always read off their textbooks. They go off the slides, but not everyone can learn like that. Not everyone can focus on a 45-minute lecture and take notes. Because I can't, so I'm not sure if everybody else can. So that's what you have to change. You have to be flexible and know what your students can do. You can do projects or see what your students are more capable of doing and more flexible to adapt to their style. Because if you keep reading off the slides and doing textbook without giving your own personal input, it'll just be like COVID-19 all over again. We didn't have any personal connection, and we don't want that. We need this personal connection.
And to add on to what they said before, in the small groups, we talked a lot about how there's a lot of lack of empathy in our current generation, and how a lot of that goes back to the fact that we need emotion-centered learning. We can't just be, teaching facts, teaching historical events without connecting them to people's real experiences. And so I think what we wanted to convey to educators is make sure that when you're teaching kids, when you're helping them learn something, center human emotions. Make sure that people are learning about other people's perspectives, and not just learning about an event, but learning about how people were impacted by said event.
So as Jasmine touched on earlier, we need to connect more of our curriculum to events that are outside the classroom. As like the stat says, modern event-based engagement is very critical to improving critical thinking skills, which can help us not just take information at face value, but actually understand it and allow us to implement it onto our daily lives. Because a lot of the information that we learn in our curriculum, if we connect it to current world events, I feel like that could be more helpful to us.
All right, to summarize, thank you all for your time. The main things that we want people to take away, and educators specifically, is listen to your students, give them empathy, prioritize connecting the material to real life, and make sure that you are fostering a collaborative environment with your students. So thank you.
A lot of credit to them. This came in the last several weeks, so they figured out a way to make this work, and I think they've benefited a lot from it. We're off to our first session now. Thank you.